Well, good morning, everyone. As you've just heard, I'm Catherine McGuinness. I chair the Policy and Resources Committee here at the City of London Corporation. And on behalf of the City Corporation, I am absolutely delighted to welcome you all to Guildhall and to the Centre for Policy Studies Margaret Thatcher Conference on Security. We are very pleased to be hosting the Centre for Policy Studies once again, following previous very successful events, such as the Margaret Thatcher Conference on Liberty and last year's Margaret Thatcher Lecture. Mrs. Thatcher visited this building many times when she was Prime Minister, including in 1982, when she spoke in this hall following the Falklands War victory parade of British armed forces through the city, and in 1988, when she spoke here alongside President Ronald Reagan during his state visit. And indeed, we have a very fine statue of her just down the corridor, should you have time to visit it. Here at the City Corporation, we work to support the city, the capital, and the country. We provide local government services for the City of London, for the Square Mile. We support economic development, education, housing, culture, heritage, and green spaces across the whole of London. And just at the moment, we're closely involved with our partner London authorities, with the other London authorities, in supporting Kensington and Chelsea in the aftermath of the tragic Grenfell Tower fire. For the country, we promote the UK's financial and professional services sector around the world, and we increasingly look to where we can develop strategic relationships with other cities and regions of the UK. We're pleased to provide a forum for debate of the big issues and challenges facing this city, this country, and the world. And that's why we're particularly glad once again to be working with the Centre for Policy Studies and to be hosting such a distinguished group of speakers from many nations. I especially look forward to hearing from Dr. Henry Kissinger, who of course has a wealth of experience and knowledge in this area. And I have to say, when we look at the world today, there is no doubt that we're faced with security challenges which just cannot be ignored. Someone once remarked how strange it is to think that at the end of the last millennium, many people thought that the greatest threat the world faced was a computer calendar glitch, the millennium bug. Remember that? We were all going to get stuck in lifts, or our toasters were going to stop working because of some problem with the computers. And it was easy back then to assume that Western liberal democratic values were comfortably spreading around the world, that the Western liberal model of government and economics had won, that globalization and new technology would bring the world closer together. And some even argued that the winning combination of democracy, liberalism, and capitalism meant that we were approaching the end of history and the universalization of Western liberal democracy as the final form of human government. Well, the early years of the new millennium have not quite lived up to that optimism, and it's clear that we haven't seen the end of history. Relations between Russia and the West are more complicated than they've been for decades. And the same can now be said for relations between the United States and its allies. We face the threat of Islamist terrorist networks across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, and British armed forces are currently engaged in military action against so-called Islamic State in Iraq and Syria as part of the international effort to contain this threat. Closer to home, political developments have become less predictable, and I'm not just talking about the recent election result. But the UK voting to leave the European Union and the election of President Trump in the United States both came as shocks to the international community, and both raised questions about the unity of the Western world and the future of old alliances. And at the same time, we have to contend with new threats, such as cyber warfare, as we saw recently with the cyber attack against the National Health Service and many organisations around the world. And that's something we're very aware of here in the city, where our tech sector plays a growing role. In recent weeks too, we've tragically seen the impact of terrorism here in the city itself. The attack on London Bridge took place within the city's boundary and followed the attacks at Westminster and in Manchester, and itself was followed by the attack at Finsbury Park Mosque. The City of London Police works tirelessly to keep Londoners safe from terrorism, cooperating closely with the Metropolitan Police, and I pay tribute to them for their actions during the recent London Bridge attack and since, and am pleased to see that the Commissioner of the City of London Police, Ian Dyson, is among the speakers today. Having talked about the rather challenging international security situation, I hope that today's speakers can offer some solutions to the challenges we face and some grounds for optimism for the future. And there are reasons to be hopeful. Global poverty is decreasing rapidly. Life expectancy is growing at an ever faster rate. Disease and hunger are in decline. So though we may be more aware of the threats we face, for most of us, life is better, longer, and safer than ever before. I hope that today's conference will play a part in helping us find ways to work together for a more secure future. And it's now my pleasure to hand over to Lord Saatchi, the Chairman of the Centre for Policy Studies. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you all. You honour us greatly with your presence here today, a historic and unprecedented gathering. I would like to extend my deep and heartfelt gratitude to the Prime Ministers, Presidents, Ambassadors, religious leaders, generals, scholars, and friends and supporters of the Centre for Policy Studies who have come from around the world to join us here today. And I particularly want to thank Catherine McGuinness for her extraordinary words, as well as the Policy and Resources Committee here at the City of London Corporation, who have supported this event so generously. I would also like to thank, with your permission, and perhaps you'd join me, to pay respect to Sir Mark Boliat, who's been a strong friend of the Centre for Policy Studies over the years, and perhaps you would join me in congratulating him on his highly deserved knighthood in the last Queen's Birthday honours. I must thank, as Catherine did, the City of London Police for protecting the security of this security conference. And I thank, of course, also many of you here from the Daily Telegraph, the Berkeley family, Murdoch McLennan, Lord Black, and the editorial team at the Telegraph for their encouragement, and Lord Strathclyde, Lara Poloni, and Sir Kevin Tebbit of ACOM for their support in creating this conference. Mrs. Thatcher, the founder of the Centre for Policy Studies, knew that there could be no prosperity without security, economic and physical. She certainly delivered wealth, jobs and growth, and for this she is justly famous. But she also worked tirelessly to defend Britain from its many enemies, both at home and abroad, and she tried to contain the threat from the IRA, and she worked with US President Reagan to famously end the Cold War and bring down the Berlin Wall. Mrs. Thatcher's policies, as she imbued the CPS, her policies were always informed, like everything that she did, by her values and her ideals. And that is the theme of this conference. What these Western values, so-called, are, whether they actually exist, and what they may mean or not mean for our security. Let me try and frame it this way. You hear it said that the sinew of war is infinite money. Maybe. But if that was true, presumably the large parts of the Middle East would now be the 51st state of America. It's not true, according to our founder, Mrs. Thatcher, or President Reagan. You will remember that he famously addressed both houses of Parliament in the House of Lords, and he explained that, I quote, "America must never allow itself to be put in a position of moral inferiority." So they didn't think it was true, nor do the generals whose famous statues stand along Whitehall outside Downing Street. For example, General Slim, who commanded the British 14th Army in Asia, who said, "You cannot win a war unless your troops believe they are fighting for a noble object." Also not true, according to, and I'm very pleased to see the Duke of Wellington here today, according to, of all people, Napoleon, who was asked late in his life, and he surely would know the answer, what is the difference between victory and defeat in war? And he gave a very clear, crisp answer. His answer was, 1 part physical, 3 parts moral. And the same thought applies to Professor Michael Clarke, whose inspiration is this conference. He was, as you know, the former director of RUSI and is now on the board of the CPS. He wants to ensure, and I hope this conference will do the trick, that we do not leave a moral vacuum for anyone else to fill. Because we would say, like all those great generals I mentioned, you cannot win a war, you cannot win an ideological war without an ideology. Can I end like this? I want to thank the magnificent team here at the Guildhall, so brilliantly led by Claire Holgate, for hosting this conference. We are all honoured to be received by such gracious hosts in the grandeur of this remarkable place. As Catherine said, the enduring partnership between the CPS and the City of London Corporation is one of which Mrs. Thatcher would be very proud. Mrs. Thatcher promoted the aspiration and dreams of all citizens who seek a better life in prosperity and with peace and security, and this is the continuing mission of the CPS. We in this room are said to be leaders of our countries. Millions would look to us for answers to the great questions of our time. When we at the CPS, in considering this conference and inviting you all here today, thought of the question, well, who is the person in the world? Who is the statesman? Who is the leader? Who is the thinker? Who is the person who can open this conference and give us guidance on these great questions? Well, I must tell you all, there was only one name that was brought forward, Henry Kissinger. And it therefore now is a great privilege, a most welcome tribute to Mrs. Thatcher and to all of you here, that I do now call upon to open the 2017 Margaret Thatcher Conference on Security, none other than Dr. Henry Kissinger. Thank you. God bless.